day of elections, my lords, violence, unprecedented violence, widely reported. I don't think it will be any ingenuous. 17 lives have been lost so far, election day and post-election. This is the first problem we have. Total 37. Number two, since the start of, my lords, the election process on the 8th or 9th, right from that day, my lords, until now, the numbers are much more. Now, it's one thing, my lords, because of my lords' benign indulgence at every stage, probably the numbers have gone down. But unfortunate truth is, these acts of violence, intentional acts of violence, vandalism, have continued unabated. This is problem number one. Problem number two, my lords, is what is the effect this has had on the election? We have given instances, we have given photographs, my lords, of how much of violence has taken place by which ballot papers have been tampered with. There is one photograph of, my lords, a person urinating, my lords, on the ballot box. This is really, my lords, defiling the democratic process beyond imagination. I asked myself the question, what kind of effective steps were taken by the SEC, my lords? Surely the SEC must be called upon to give an answer as to report as to what kind of steps were taken, where appropriate, given instructions for deployment of the central forces. Initially, the stand, my lords, was that no need for any central forces, we'll take care of everything. Then they said 22 companies. Then they said 822. They scaled it up to 822. Then they complained saying that only 300 or 350 are coming. Then the entire complement was made available. After all that, they owe it to my lords to say what kind of instructions were given for deployment and what steps were taken to prevent all of this. Then, my lords, during the transfer of the ballot papers, during the counting process, which seems to be underway even now, there have been problems. In fact, in our writ petition, we have catalogued the problems, some of the major problems which are there. Please come to my writ petition from page 17 onwards, 16, 17 onwards. We have given instance after instance. One minute. The petitioner state at this juncture, it is pertinent to list out the various instances of electoral malpractices and the violence which was perpetrated during the entire electoral process, and more specifically on the 8th of July, as a consequence of which 17 lives were lost, and the electoral process was exactly opposite to what was envisaged by this honorable court in the various orders passed in the public interest litigations moved before this honorable court prior to the elections. I'm reading from page 17 onwards, my lord, my apology. Yes. Para 12. 12A. Right from the inception, the electoral process was compromised, which is evident from the fact that a purported candidate of the ruling dispensation filed his nomination while being in Saudi Arabia. Judicial notice was taken of such infraction, whereafter his nomination was cancelled. Thus, from the very inception, there have been instances of compromise with the electoral process. Further, prior to the day for withdrawal of nominations, extreme pressure was perpetrated upon the candidates of the opposition parties to forcibly withdraw their nominations. Allegations were leveled of threats of rape, murder, and other heinous crimes if any person contested the election to put up an electoral resistance against the ruling dispensation in the state. All such instances of infraction culminated into the perpetration of large-scale violence and electoral malpractices such as booth capturing, rigging, false voting, and intimidating voters in a huge number of booths during the elections held on 8/7/2023. It was widely reported in the press that at various booths across the state, ballot boxes were looted and thrown into ponds, ballot papers were burnt, and there were also instances of antisocial elements intimidating presiding officers and running away with ballot boxes. Various instances of continuous false voting were also reported by the mainstream media from various locations. There were certain booths in Diamond Harbor. We have localized, my lords, some of those instances, where antisocial elements affiliated to the ruling dispensation in the state resorted to false voting by keeping the polling party and the police officials posted therein at gunpoint. Thereafter, at so-and-so, booth number 1 witnessed a strange phenomenon where the presiding officer himself was dictating people where to put the stamp of mandate on the ballot paper. It was also reported at some blocks that a single person put his thumb impression and cast several hundred votes, thereby committing malpractice. As a matter of fact, police personnel were themselves not safe, which is evident from the fact that certain police officers sustained injury in Malda. Vote looting was also reported at village so-and-so. Then agent of so-and-so was killed inside a booth at Kuch Bihar. False voting and electoral malpractices were also reported from such and such a place. Again, we have given the details. Then false voting reported from another place. Most shocking incident was that a photograph was clicked where a miscreant was seen urinating on of a ballot box and making a mockery of the sacred democratic festival. Mandal Panch, this just goes on, my lords. We have given all the details. Now, there is one other important aspect I want to highlight here, my lords. The State Election Commission itself considered it necessary and appropriate to order re-election in about 600 or 700 booths. In fact, we made representations on the day of polling that so much of violence and booth capturing and rigging and all the other problems have taken place. Therefore, there ought to be re-polling in manifold more number of booths.
50,000. I have said.
In fact, they have said 50,000, but with a sense of proportionality, my lords, we have come before this honorable court. We have given Annexure 8. We have said at least in 6,000 more booths, there has to be repolling. Therefore, the SEC has to tell my lords on what basis repolling was ordered, and that too only in 600 booths.